It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
You open your eyes, peeling back the heavy veil of sleep, and realize that the world is exactly where you left it. The room around you has not rewritten its own grammar during the dark hours. The ceiling is still the ceiling. Your name still fits. The cup on the nightstand, the door handle, the edge of the table, they all simply remain in their usual places, utterly oblivious to it all. Each of these things persists in its own identity with an absolute, unyielding discipline. If you observe them stripped of the anesthesia of habit, this sheer persistence feels like nothing short of a miracle. Yet, we call it normality. To survive, the human mind must reduce prodigies to routine, demotes mystery to background, transforms continuity into furniture. The stranger thing isn't that the universe exists, it's that it keeps being the same universe. Not that things are, but that they stay. Every morning, reality hands itself back to you in roughly the same shape you left it, ordered enough that you don't have to relearn language or rebuild your sense of where the floor is. With a touch of ironic caution, we might call this silent agreement the protocol of stability. It is not a machine buried beneath the fabric of the cosmos, nor a codified theory. It's just a way of pointing at something odd, that reality, surrounded on all sides by chaos and decay, continues to offer itself as a texture that remains sufficiently legible. The first thing to let go of is the idea that continuity is a given. It's a process. It's a work. This sounds obvious, but it isn't really, because we've been trained to experience stability as the default and disruption as the exception. Biology has a word for the actual truth of it: homeostasis. An organism doesn't survive by finding some definitive balance. It survives by constantly correcting itself. It compensates, redistributes, modulates, absorbs deviations and disturbances without ceasing to function. Temperature drifts, chemistry shifts, signals fire and adjust. Temperature, pressure, sugar concentration, hormonal balance, nervous activity, everything moves and pursues itself. What we call being alive is really an ongoing negotiation with chaos. Stability isn't the absence of motion. It's motion that has figured out how not to undo itself. You can see this everywhere if you stop treating the world's persistence for granted. A city stands not because concrete is solid, but because an enormous number of invisible things are happening all the time. Pipes holding pressure, software routing trains, people patching, sweeping, redirecting. A friendship survives not by being perfect, but by absorbing small failures and turning them into new equilibrium. Your own mind holds together by constantly editing itself, forgetting some things, stitching others together, smoothing over the noise. Persistence, once stripped of metaphysical slogans, very often resembles successful maintenance. Physics, of course, has more time-tested words for all this: symmetry, dynamic equilibrium, conservation. But even if we express it all in scientific terms, the mystery doesn't go away. It simply changes its form. When scientists talk about emergence, this is exactly what they mean. A brain, a crystal, an atmospheric system. Each of these phenomena clearly demonstrates a form that cannot be reduced to a dry list of its microscopic components. And to say that stability emerges is to admit that it was not guaranteed at the start. It is to recognize that form is produced or maintained through a continuous negotiation with disorder. Thus, I'm not claiming that there is some archive of order or a procedure embedded by some remote intelligence into the very fabric of the world around us. Rather, I'm saying that the continuity of reality, if you look closely, is more like an ongoing success than an obvious fact. Science also has the concept of an attractor, a sort of gravitational funnel that a system keeps drifting back toward even after being knocked around. What's more, it is not some kind of prison. It is, rather, an island of stability, a mechanism through which the system restores itself within certain parameters of coherence. The experienced world works something like this. Things tremble, but don't dissolve. They deform and recover. A pendulum oscillates and returns. A climate varies, but within thresholds. A population grows, contracts, rebalances. After all, the reality doesn't actually have to be flawless to be livable. It just has to stay coherent enough that you can find your bearings. There are moments, however, when this holding together reveals itself precisely because it thins. Very little is needed. Fever, insomnia, panic, grief, prolonged exposure to anxiety, a night in which thought refuses to gather itself, a room that suddenly feels too silent, too full, or too far from you. Suddenly the world loses its density. Distances feel off. Time starts stuttering. And you understand, with a clarity you didn't ask for, how much work is involved in things feeling normal. Your own brain is part of the maintenance crew. It doesn't just receive a continuous reality, it builds one, filling in gaps, smoothing over glitches, assembling coherence out of fragmented noise. What we experience as seamless is a collaboration between a world that, for some reason, refuses to fall apart, and a mind determined to make it make sense. People have always known, somewhere underneath everything, that order isn't guaranteed. The ancient Egyptians didn't treat Mat, the equilibrium of the world, as a background condition. They treated it as something that needed defending, something that could be lost. Scientists today do a version of the same thing in labs, meticulously removing interference to prove that stability has to be earned. Like electrical grids, or the protocols that keep the internet running, ontological coherence is infrastructure, so successful it goes invisible, noticed only when it fails. We can't walk around in a constant state of astonishment at the fact that the floor is still the floor. Life runs on habit. But underneath the habit, nothing is actually staying still. Cells are renewing themselves. Mountains are slowly coming apart. Languages are drifting. Reality is a continuous flow that has, somehow, learned to have a shape. And this form, precisely because it is not guaranteed in any way, deserves to be regarded with greater respect. And the great irony, by the way, is that we ask life for exactly this: novelty without collapse, transformation without total loss of orientation, mutation without annihilation. We want everything to move, but within margins compatible with our capacity to endure movement. In that sense, our desire resembles the reality we inhabit. We too do not seek dead fixity, but a continuity elastic enough to to withstand change. Perhaps the initial question, then, does not concern only the cosmos. It concerns you as well. How do you reassemble yourself every morning? After a night of scattered dreams and fragmented memory, how does a self cohere enough to put on shoes and pick up an unfinished thought? Slowly, and through a kind of internal recomposition, gathering what tends to scatter, restoring enough form to function without pretending the cracks aren't there. Tomorrow, the window will still be a window. The floor will hold. Time will do its usual impression of moving in a straight line. You won't spend the morning in awe of this, and you shouldn't have to. But every so often, it's worth remembering what's actually going on. That reality isn't a passive given, it's an active holding together, happening constantly at every scale. And if this is not enough to speak of mystery, if the word is too large, too borrowed from contexts that do not quite apply here, it is enough, at least, to speak of attention. About that special kind of attention that doesn't demand reverence, nor does it require you to put ordinary life on hold. It merely asks that you occasionally pause at the edge of your routine to notice exactly what is holding together and what effort it takes. And the rest, as it always has, simply continues. See you in the next episode.